Buying a home in Hawaii can be one of the most exciting, but let's be honest, one of the most stressful decisions you will ever make in your life. But here's the deal. Understanding the purchase contract is what separates a confident buyer from those who end up getting blindsided during the transaction. In this video, I'm breaking it all down step by section with real life example in plain English so that you can truly understand what the purchase contract says, how you can use it to your benefit and protect you as a buyer during the transaction. Aloha, my name is Daniel Lee Kim, award-winning real estate agent here on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. Grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's turn this boring, long document into your biggest ally on your real estate journey here in Hawaii. Like I said, I'm covering from Section A all the way to Section T, and whether you are a first-time home buyer or seasoned buyer, this is going to help you understand the purchase contract and truly use it to your own benefit in your real estate journey here in Hawaii. This is the standard purchase contract in the state of Hawaii, and it was released in October of last year, 2024, with the most recent update being in August of 2024. Now, it does reflect the mandate that occurred due to the NAR settlement, so this is the most up-to-date version that we're going to cover in this video. This is a legal binding contract once it's fully executed, meaning both the buyers and the sellers signed. Now, it does to clearly delineate the responsibilities, liabilities, and the rights for both buyer and the seller. For the purpose of this video, let's just say that I am representing you as a buyer's agent. Now, Section 1 has to do with agency disclosure. Now, it is pretty self-explanatory on what seller's agents and buyer's agents are. However, I do want to cover dual agency, mainly because there is a false rumor or understanding from buyers that when you work directly with the seller, you somehow end up benefiting or getting a better deal somehow. And that is far from the truth. Dual agency occurs when I represent both the buyer and the seller as a listing agent. In that case, I must remain neutral when it comes to negotiation, and I cannot advance one party's interest over the other. And because of that, both buyers and sellers must sign a dual agency disclosure and consent form in the state of Hawaii. Additionally, in A2 disclosure, it's just disclosing what each sellers and buyers agents brokerages are. Additionally, if any of the buyer or seller is a customer, meaning they don't have a licensed real estate agent helping them out. Section B has to do with initial earnest money deposit. Now, this is your skin in the game. It's the upfront money that you would directly deposit into escrow to show the sellers how serious you are about buying this property. In the state of Hawaii, we make two deposits. There's the initial and then there's the second deposit. The initial deposit occurs 1 or 2 business days after your offer is accepted, and the second deposit occurs 1 or 2 business days after we clear J1, or also known as the inspection period here in the state of Hawaii. And depending on the market state, buyer's market or seller's market, I typically recommend my buyers put in anywhere from 1 to 5% of the purchase contract. So if the property is listed at $1 million, then you will be putting down $10,000. So $5,000 for the initial and then $5,000 for the second deposit. If you are using a VA loan, then at the end of the closing, you will get your deposit back and you can use that towards the closing cost. Or if you are lucky and got your closing costs covered by the sellers, then the deposit will be refunded back to you at the time of closing. Section C has to do with offer to buy, purchase price, and financial consideration. Now, C1 is very simple. It's giving them the offer expiration date so that they will go here with the timestamp. Now, Section C is very important because it clearly shows how much you are willing to put down. So you have the initial earnest money deposit here with the additional deposit here. Now, if you are making a down payment, we will clearly show that in this line, and how much you are financing in this little window. With that said, if you are a VA buyer, we will want to annotate that you will be getting the deposit back at the time of closing, and that will be inputted in this line. So total purchase price will be shown down here. Now, C3 is something new along with C4. So C3 has to do with seller's concession to buyer. So the buyers have the ability or an opportunity to negotiate credit right off the bat when they make an offer. So for example, I just submitted two separate offers with two concessions. One of the client requested a $20,000 credit right off the bat and the other $30,000. So that would be inputted in this box right here. And C4 is compensation to buyer's brokerage. Now, this is very important because this came about due to the recent NAR settlement. The seller has the option to compensate for the buyer's brokerage. Now, it is an option, so they may not end up compensating, or they may, we just don't know that. So it is a negotiation that we need to do. And the going rate that I'm seeing in the market right now is anywhere between 2 to 3%. Section D has to do with addenda. This is where documents can modify or add on to the purchase contract. For example, a good one will be as is. A lot of buyers are scared about the title, but just understand that you are still able to negotiate for any repairs, replacement, or concession. It's just that when the property is conveyed to you, it is as is. Another addenda would be lead-based paint disclosure, sight unseen. If you were purchasing a property from, let's say California, for example, and you just did a very thorough virtual tour with me, then we would submit this addenda. Additionally, a common one that I'm seeing are the VA financing, which gives the veteran or military family an opportunity to back out with the escape clause, which states that if the property doesn't appraise to the purchase price, then the buyer is able to back out and still get their deposits back. And there are a few other addendas that we like to submit from Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate just to protect our buyers even further. Section E has to do with the property itself. E1 is a description, so it will have the TMK tax map key. It's kind of like a social security for the property and would have all the information, historical data from when it was built, exact details of the property, the history of the sale, the amount, tax assessment, etc. So everything will be on there. Additionally, you will determine or not determine, but mark if it's a fee simple property or a leasehold property. A fee simple property is where the owner will own both the structure and the land, so more of a traditional way to own real estate, whereas a leasehold is where you have to lease the land from a landlord, and the lease does expire, sometime in the future. So I see that as more of a liability. Now, E2 has to do with inclusions, things that will come with the property. And some of the typical ones that I see are, ceiling fans, dishwasher disposal, dryer, washer, etc. So anything that is going to come with the property again. E3, inclusion of furnishing. So this is very common when buyers are purchasing a short-term rental that comes furnished. If this is the case, then as a buyer, we would request that the sellers provide an inventory list, and then we would have a certain amount of time to review that and to take inventory. And for whatever reason, if we're not satisfied with the list and the condition, then we do have the option to cancel and still get our money back. Now, E4 is exclusions, meaning anything that the seller does not want to convey with the property will be listed right here. E5 has to do with photovoltaic system, solar, or PV. Now, this is where, you would request all the documentation such as like any permits, are there any interconnection agreements like net metering with HECO, warranties, manuals, etc. And you will have a certain amount of time to review those documents. And for whatever reason, if you're not satisfied with them, you do have the option to cancel and still get your money back. And lastly, if the property comes with any security alarm system, we would also request any documentation so that we can review them. Section F has everything to do with closing. F1 is just defining what a closing is. So closing means when all the documents are signed, money is transferred, and the deed is recorded. And F2 has to do with the closing date. The average time period for an escrow in the state of Hawaii is about 45 days. So what we typically put here is 45 days from acceptance date. F3 is talking to a unilateral right to extend. What that means is, as a buyer, if we wanted to extend the closing date for a good reason, then we would not need to get the seller's consent. Now, the average time period that I've seen here is anywhere from 7 to 14 days. Another option that we have is time is of the essence, where neither party will have the option to extend the closing date. F4 is where we would identify a third neutral escrow company to help us with the transaction. F5 is just saying that they will prorate and adjust any expenses for both the buyer and the seller at the closing. And lastly, F6 is demonstrating how much you will pay as a buyer, but also it does say how much the sellers are responsible for as well. F7, notice on conveyance tax. So you have to let escrow know whether or not you're purchasing the property as a primary residency or as an investment property, because if the seller, if you purchase it as a primary residency, then the seller will pay slightly less tax compared to an investor purchasing that property. F8 has to do with assessment. The definition here states that it is in any obligation or loan levied against the property by the association. Now, this tends to occur if the association does not have enough funds in the budget or in the reserve to cover any upcoming expenses. Now, it is just stating how we're going to negotiate the assessment, whether it is paid in full by the seller or it will be prorated by the buyer. F9, consents. There are times when we do have to receive consents from the seller or any other party in the transaction. A good example would be like leasehold documents. And lastly, F12, keys to the property. The purchase contract does state that the seller will, at a minimum, convey the property with one set of keys. However, additional keys or garage fobs, etc., will be at buyer's expense. Section G has to do with title review. Sellers have to provide us with a title report so that we can confirm the ownership of the property and that the title is free and clear of any encumbrances, such as liens or anything like that. Now, if there is any defect in the title, then we can work with the seller and the escrow company to make sure that the defect is remedied. If they are not able to do so within the given amount of time, then we have the option of canceling and still getting our money back. Now, here are a few examples of what I've seen so far. I've seen where the seller did not pay for the property tax, so there was a lien on it, and it was an easy fix. Escrow pretty much paid it out at closing from the seller's proceed. Another one that I've seen was a lien from child support. Or something that I see a lot is when the seller has a very common name and it is mistaken for someone else that has a lien. Usually, that is something the seller will just clear out with the escrow and title company and provide them with additional documentation and get that removed from the title. Section H, cash funds and financing contingency. H1, this is stating that you have all the funds necessary, such as deposit and the full down payment, available in your bank account to transact. However, H2 is stating that you do not have those funds readily available and it is contingent on obtaining cash funds. Now, a good example of something like this would be if you were liquidating, stocks or CD. I had a client who were using their CD. It was maturing in about 30 or 40 days or something like that from the acceptance date. And they just need to show that documentation and the amounts so that they could use that funds towards their down payment. H3 financing contingency pretty much allows you as a buyer to cancel on this transaction if for whatever reason you are not able to perform or if the lender is not able to perform. Also, H4 buyer's obligation, there are time requirements in terms of when we have to provide the sellers with our pre-approval, proof of funds, conditional loan approval, and final loan approval. And the sellers do have a say in this matter, and they have a certain amount of time to determine if they want to continue moving forward or cancel on the transaction as well. Section I has to do with seller disclosure. Now, this is where a seller must disclose any material fact that can affect the property value, and they must prepare this document in good faith and due care. So, any defects or repair that they have conducted or they know about, they must disclose. They have a certain period or timeline they have to provide us this document with. And we prefer to have that as soon as possible so that we can use it during our due diligence period and look further into it. Now, once we receive it, we do have a certain amount of time to review the documents and cancel if there's anything that we see and do not like and still get our money back. Now, let's say later on in the transaction, we do discover something that they did not disclose, then that would become an amendment for the seller, and they will have to provide us with an updated seller's disclosure. And at that point, as buyers, we have the right to review it and determine if we want to continue with the transaction or cancel and still get our money back. Section I-5, general disclosure. So this is where they kind of list out all the general issues that could affect the property and that the buyer should do, conduct the due diligence during their inspection period. So some of them are governmental and private restriction disclosure, building permit disclosure, asbestos disclosure, hazardous waste and toxic substance disclosure, wastewater disposal disclosure, mold disclosure, sex offender disclosure, flood zones disclosure, lead-based paint, lead-based paint for renovation, repair, and painting disclosure because it requires a licensed professional. Climate change and natural hazard, wire funds and sensitive personnel information warning, pretty much OPSEC, and abandoned well. Section J has to do with inspection, maintenance, and warranties. So J1 is where we identify the time period we're requesting to do our inspection and, basic due diligence. So average that I'm seeing could range anywhere from 7 days to 15 days. And, the shorter being more aggressive, more appealing for the sellers, longer being more safer, more time for the buyers to take their time and do a thorough inspection. Now, also during this time, if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed and you want to cancel, just let me know and we can do that as well. Now, the time period actually starts ticking once our offer is accepted. So the next day will be day one, the day after that too, and so on and so forth. Now, if the general inspector identifies that we need to look into something more, in detail or further, then we will go ahead and, hire that professional to look into it and make sure that we are purchasing a property that is in good condition. During this period is also when we would negotiate for concessions, repairs, or replacement. So J1 is not fully approved until we negotiate what we want. And after that is when you make your second deposit. So everything is kind of coming together at this point. Now, once we have negotiated our repair, this clause right here is pretty important. I'm sorry, this right here, withholding, because When we conduct our final walkthrough, which usually occurs 5 days prior to closing, we are going to make sure that the condition of the property is the way we left it during the inspection or at the final day of the inspection, or if we requested any repair or replacement, we check that it was done properly. Now, if for whatever reason repair was not done, then escrow is going to withhold 150% of the cost that it would require to, repair that issue and disperse it once it is completed. Now, for example, if the plumbing was going to cost $1,000, escrow would withhold 1,500 until the job is completed, and then they would disperse it to the seller. This is a great forcing function for the sellers to do that repair, but also protects the buyer as well. If there are any items remaining in the property or anything that you don't want in the property, then J8, this is the time period when you would require the seller to remove everything out of the house. Typically, 5 days prior to closing is what we put in here. In terms of cleaning, this is an optional thing. Now, in a competitive market, I advise my clients to remove this option because it makes your offer stand out a little bit more and it saves the seller a little bit of money. Now, we do have the option of asking them to provide a receipt or not. If you are going to request that they clean the property, then request the receipt because you want to make sure that they did it professionally. And lastly, J10 animal-related treatment. This is referring to fleas, ticks, etc. if the seller had animals, especially carpet. Section K has to do with staking and survey, and it only applies to single-family homes. Now, with that said, Section K1 has to do with staking, which only provides you with boundary points. Now, K2 survey, on the other hand, provides you with one more layer deep and gives you encroachment data, where they are, what encroachment is encroaching onto your property, or if there's anything that is encroaching onto your neighbor's property from your own property. Now, K3, if there are any encroachment that has been identified, then you as a buyer have the option of canceling the purchase contract and still get your money back. Or you can choose to work with the seller and kind of work out the encroachment issue. You have two options. One is to, the seller has to work with the neighbor and remove the encroachment or get the encroachment agreement signed. That way, going into it what your responsibility would be for that encroachment. Here is a good example on what a survey looks like. Pretty much shows you all the boundaries of the property, and it also shows you an encroachment area, which is identified right here. So section L has to do with termites. Now, although we are in Hawaii, we do have termites, even in condos on the 35th floor. The way you would get a termite in a condo would be through furniture or cabinets, pretty much any wood that has not been treated. Now, with that said, we have the option of choosing which company or who we use for the termite inspection. However, typically the seller will pay for that inspection. Now, in a seller's market, you do have the option of reimbursing or paying for the termite inspection, which makes your offer stand out compared to those that are asking for the seller to pay for it. Now, one thing to note with the termite inspection report is that if there is substantial damage, then the seller will need to make the appropriate disclosure pretty much amend the disclosure that they provided us, which gives us another option to take a relook at it and determine if it's something we want to pursue. Now, if infestation is reported, then the sellers automatically have to treat that, whether it be via spot treatment or tenting for a single family home. So section M has to do with additional documents the seller has to provide to us. And these are going to be condominium documents, condo docs, or association documents. Now, this is very important if you are purchasing a condo here in the state of Hawaii, because this is where we are going to find out the state of the association in terms of the financials. So we will determine if there is any litigation going on, how that may impact you, how the reserves are, and how that may impact you in the future financially. Is it healthy? And are they going to be able to afford the renovations, repairs that are coming up? If not, how is that going to be handled? So all that information is going to come out of here. Additional information that you may be able to find is, parking spot informations for assigned parking, or stuff like house rules or bylaws that may impact the living situation on the premise. Now, with that said, the sellers have to provide this document to us as soon as possible. We will give them a timeline. Once we receive that document, we will have a certain amount of time to review the document and determine if it's something we want to move forward or not, and cancel and still get our money back. So a good example of finding out what is going on with the condominium is, I just had a client recently purchase in a condo where they had an increase in the maintenance fee, and they were going to specially assess the owners for some minor renovations of the recreational areas. So that was disclosed in the M1 documents, and we're able to kind of figure out, hey, is this something we want to pursue? If so, what are our options? We were able to work with the seller and get a little bit of credit to help us kind of offset that expense that my buyer did not anticipate going into the purchase. So when we receive the documents, we'll receive them via email, in a PDF or some sort of hyperlink to download them. When we do review the documents and we find out something that adversely impact the value of the property, then the sellers do have to amend the seller's disclosure and provide that to us. Now that gives us an option to either cancel or not based on this information. It's still protected, meaning getting our money back for the security deposit. And lastly, pretty important review of the documents. Obviously, I can help you kind of review it together based on my experience. I can point out some of the things you want to look at. However, I am not a licensed attorney or CPA, so if it's something you want someone like an attorney to take a look at, then definitely that is something I can help you with, refer an attorney or CPA. Now, I just had a client who we came across a litigation that was disclosed, or we found out during this, M1 review period, and he wanted a second set of eyes just to make sure that everything was good and he wasn't going to have an issue in the future. We did have to extend our M1 review period. However, we were able to get that licensed attorney to take a look at it and get a second opinion and a legal advice on how to proceed. So that is an option, and we can always do that. Section N comes into play if we are purchasing a rental property, whether it be a short-term rental or just an investment in a single-family home or a condo. Now, N1 states that the delivery of the property will be free and clear of tenants or unoccupied. So this would be a typical scenario when you are buying a property that is vacant and you're going to move in. Into rental documents. So if the property is rented, we will want to see the lease, the security deposits. If it's a short-term rental, we want to see the reservations, all that stuff we will want to review and make sure that we don't have any issues with it. We will have a certain amount of time to review that and make a decision if we want to continue or cancel and still get our money back. Section O has to do with termination, mediation, arbitration, and any other matters. So O1, termination due to default. Let's just say that if the seller's default, then as a buyer, you can cancel or you may seek specific performance of this purchase contract. Now, on the other hand, if the buyer, meaning you, default, then the seller can cancel on us and may retain the deposit as breach of contract. Now, when it comes to O2, termination within contingency time period, this is very simple. As long as we remain within the contingency time period, we are able to cancel and we are protected and we'll be able to retain our deposit. A good example of this would be any contingency that is time-based. For example, J1 inspection period, M1 condo docs or association document review. So these are periods when you can cancel up to that time, expiration date and time and still be protected. O3 termination after specified contingency condition time period. So a good example of this would be if the seller was not able to provide us with a seller's disclosure within the time period they were given. So usually I like to give them 7 days. Now, if they're unable to do that, then we can cancel on them because they did not meet that time period. However, in here, we do have to put in a time. So I usually put 5 days within the condition time period, meaning once they default on it, we have 5 days to give them a written notification to cancel in order to retain our security deposit back, right? Now, the rest of these have to do with legal matters and just to kind of simplify things, if there is any issue between the buyer and the seller or any other third party, then the primary method of getting things resolved will be through a mediation. This is where a retired judge or a current judge will sit in to kind of mediate, get both parties to meet in the middle. If for whatever reason we are not able to agree on that, then it will go on to arbitration. Now, the choice of law in this form will be state of Hawaii law. And obviously, when it comes to the attorney fees, whoever loses in the lawsuit will have to pay for the attorney. Section P has to do with foreign or non-resident buyer and or seller. Now, HARPTA and FERPTA both applies to sellers only. However, buyers need to be aware of this because eventually they may end up becoming sellers themselves. Now, for HARPTA, HARPTA stands for Hawaii Real Property Tax Act, and it's a withholding of 7.25% of the sale price. Now, even if you are in the military and PCSing, you are subject to HARTA. However, there is a way to file for a waiver so you don't have to be subject to this withholding. Now, when it comes to FERPTA, so pretty much whoever that is not a U.S. citizen, they are subject to 15% withholding. So that is a lot higher than HARPTA. So you must understand that HARPTA, non-resident U.S. citizen, and FERPTA, non-U.S. citizen selling properties. Section Q is special terms. So this is where we would input anything that is not covered in the purchase contract, but we want both the buyer and the sellers to be aware and agree to it. Few examples would be escalation clause. I've used this a few times actually when there was some competition in the property. So this is where the buyer is telling the seller that, hey, we are offering you this much for the price of the property. However, we are willing to outbid the highest offer by a certain amount as long as you provide us with proof of the offer that we are outbidding. That's one of them. The other would be if we are going to reimburse the seller for a termite inspection, then we would identify that here. Another thing is, we use this a lot actually, is having the seller provide us a professional building permit package to make sure that every, or not every, but all the renovations are done properly with the permit. If they are not, at least we know what we're getting ourselves into and we can make a decision, an informed decision on whether or not we want to pursue that property. Another thing that we could throw in here would be stuff like utilizing the credit in a creative way, such as using it for a seller buy down, such as 3-2-1, 2-1 buy down. So all that stuff that is not covered in the purchase contract will be listed here. Section Art has to deal with brokerage firm services and disclaimer. Now, when it comes to being a real estate agent, we can provide input, opinion, recommendations based on our experiences. However, just understand that we are not a CPA licensed attorney, estate planner, accountant, appraiser, engineer, or anything like that. So if you are looking for professional advice, then we can definitely refer you to people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to rental property, we cannot guarantee a rental value. We are able to, however, pull comps and provide you with the range of the rental value for a similar property based on historical data. That's something we can do. Resale value of the property, obviously, we cannot predict the future, so we just cannot guarantee a future value for a certain property. And R4 is saying that we cannot force a buyer or seller to buy or sell. And lastly, R6, disclosure of real estate licensing status. If either the buyer or the seller is related to an agent or if they are agents themselves, they would have to disclose that here. Section S, general provisions, kind of going over some definitions to make it easier to understand. So acceptance date is when either the seller accepts and signs the purchase contract, or if it's a counter, the buyer signs the counter that is made by the seller. That becomes the acceptance date. And all the time periods, contingencies are based on that date. Dates and time is going to be State of Hawaii Standard Time. And for an expiration, it will expire that day at 11:59 p.m. So a good example would be if our inspection period expired on January 6th, it will be January 6th at 11:59 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Time is of the essence. Although we have the unilateral right to extend, both parties should put good effort into making sure that we meet all the timeline. For example, inspections, we want to do them within the given time period. For sellers, they want to give us documents within the time period they're allotted to make sure that we continue to move forward in the transaction. Fair housing, very simplistically put, we cannot discriminate for any reason. S5 electronic or signatures are okay. S6 counterpart, if a buyer signs a copy of a document that is identical to a copy that the seller signed, then that becomes a binding legal document. And lastly, complete agreement. This contract constitutes an entire agreement between the buyer and the seller. So any previous agreement that was made will be nulled, and this kind of supersedes that. Now, no other amendments will be made unless it is in writing and signed and agreed by both buyer and the seller. So that's what complete agreement S7 is saying. And lastly, section T, the outcome of the purchase contract or the counter. So when we make an offer, we send over the purchase contract. They can either accept the purchase contract as is, they can counter any of our provisions, contingencies, or the amount, or they can flat out reject. So those are the three outcomes that you can anticipate when you submit an offer here in the state of Hawaii. So that concludes the purchase contract review. I hope you got a lot out of it and learned a few things at least. Now, whether you are the one purchasing or if you know someone that is thinking about purchasing, please share this video with them. The purpose is to help everyone out and make sure that they understand the purchase contract. Feel free to do so at my YouTube channel, or you can follow me at Instagram, Aloha Agent Daniel.